Before the legends, before the spooks, it was just a humble figure made of straw standing quietly in the fields. You've seen it in gardens, cartoons, and on Halloween decorations. But where did the Scarecrow really come from? To find out, we'll need to travel back in time. To ancient farms and forgotten gods, and stories stitched together across continents. This is the origin of the Scarecrow, and it started long, long ago. In the dawn of civilization, Egypt's survival rested on the wheat fields of the Nile. A season's harvest meant life or death. But as the stalks ripened, the skies darkened with wings, flocks of birds descending in greedy swarms. So, the Egyptians conjured their answer. Wooden figures, rough-hewn and faceless, stood among the rows with arms outstretched. Their shadows fell across the fields like silent guards. To the birds, these strange shapes were enough to cause a pause, a flicker of doubt. And in that hesitation lay survival. These wooden guardians were not mere tools, but the first protectors of the harvest. Travel north into Greece, where the Scarecrow took on the face of a god. In the vineyards, posts were carved with the likeness of Priapus, the rustic guardian of fertility. His eyes, unblinking and severe, glared across the twisting vines. The birds fled his gaze. But it wasn't only they who felt it. Thieves who crept into the vineyards found themselves under the god's watch, and legend promised that those who stole would be cursed. These scarecrows were no longer just figures of wood and straw. They were divine warnings, protectors of order, as well as crops. Further inland, in the misty fields of Germany, the Scarecrow grew darker. Farmers carved faces into wood, blank and expressionless, and draped cloaks over their frames. In the shifting fog, these effigies looked less like guardians and more like figures waiting in silence, half effigy, half phantom. For the crows, that illusion was enough. But for villagers, it was something more. Whispers spread of haunted fields, of figures that seemed to move when no one was looking. These scarecrows protected the harvest through fear, not only of the birds, but of the people who passed their cloaked silhouettes in the mist. Far across the continent in Japan, the Scarecrow became a master of illusion. Farmers built figures called kakashi, stuffing straw into ragged clothes and setting them like sentinels on the edges of the rice paddies. But the true trick was at their feet. Pots that sent streams of smoke into the air. The scent was sharp, bitter, suffocating. Sparrows veered away long before they reached the rice. The kakashi stood like travelers by the roadside, cloaked in smoke, eerie in their stillness. Not just guardians of fields, but ghostly presences that blurred the line between the human and the otherworldly. Back home in North America, scarecrows became famous in a new way. Native peoples had their own methods. Fish heads tied to poles, their stench alone enough to drive birds from the corn, or strips of cloth that danced in the wind like restless spirits. Later, European settlers brought their rag-stuffed frames across the ocean. Soon the American countryside was dotted with them, wooden skeletons packed with straw, old clothes flapping on crooked arms. These ragged silhouettes became more than just farm tools. They were stitched into the culture as both ordinary and eerie, familiar enough to stand in daylight and uncanny enough to haunt the imagination at night. And so the Scarecrow crossed from the fields into folklore. People whispered that spirits could slip inside them, or that straw men might rise and walk under the moonlight. What began as a defense against crows became a figure of unease, more human than lifeless, more haunting than humble. By the 1800s, in America's cornfields, scarecrows took on eerie forms beneath the harvest moon. Some stood silently in fields, their silhouettes merging with the rising sun. Others wore strange masks, fish heads or cloth sacks, meant to frighten both birds and men. They loomed over the corn, uncanny figures in patched coats and wide hats. They blurred into ghost stories, farmers whispering of scarecrows that moved under moonlight. And by harvest festivals, they joined the pumpkins, lanterns, and autumn fires. And so, from the banks of the Nile to the porches of Halloween, the scarecrow has never stopped watching over us. Born of necessity, shaped by story, it became more than wood and straw. It became a legend. Even today, when you see one standing quietly in a field, you can almost feel the stories stitched into its frame. Because the scarecrow is more than a figure of straw. It is a guardian of harvests and a keeper of tales. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe to History Unfolded, where history comes to life.